All right, Todd. Well, first, I wanted to say thanks for having me in here. Great being able to chat with you a little bit. Good to be in here, and welcome to the show.
Thanks for stopping by.
My pleasure. I want to start just with the basics. We're in the Easterseals of Central Texas headquarters. For people that are unfamiliar with that organization and those two words, talk to me about what that means. What is that?
Easterseals. Well, probably the place to start. It has nothing to do with Easter or seals. We don't save seals, but it's a organization that most people over the age of 50 have probably heard of.
Yep.
Because of our historical roots. We just celebrated our 100th anniversary nationally about 2 years ago. In Central Texas, we've been in operation here for about 84 years now, 85 years. And so we've been around a long time, but we're like a lot of nonprofits. We're one of those organizations that has gone about our business, helping people, figured out ways to do that really well, and support and sustain ourselves through revenue streams that don't require us to put billboards up all over town.
Yep.
And have done a really good job serving people with disabilities. So we started 100 and some years ago as the Society for Crippled Children in Cleveland, Ohio. And over the course of about the first 50 years or so of Easterseals' life, operated as a Society for Crippled Children. Obviously, the term crippled children needed to be changed. Much to their credit, way back in the 50s and 60s, they realized that and went about finding ways to change the name. So at that time, one of the most successful fundraising drives that the Society for Crippled Children did every year is every year around Easter time, they would send out these pages of stamps, free stamps, and that people could use with their name and address on them. Some organizations still do it today. And then they'd ask for a donation in return. And people loved it, raised a ton of money. And over time, the Society for Crippled Children, in the public vernacular, we became known as, oh, you're the Easterseals people, because we would send these stamps or seals out around Easter time. So we were just known as the Easterseals people. So in the 60s or so, they decided, well, that's what everyone seems to know us as. So they changed their name to Easterseals. And for years, our brand included a visual of a stamp as kind of a subtle connection to that. Well, like most fundraising campaigns, it has a life cycle, and it kind of outlived its usefulness eventually. And they still produce stamps every year, seals that they send out, but it's more of a novelty than it is anything that supports us in a serious way as an organization. But we've been Easterseals ever since. So that's why most people over the age of 50 or 60 know who we are. But one of our biggest challenges as an organization was finding a way to engage people under the age of 50 that knew nothing about the Easterseals back in the 50s and 60s. And since then, financially, we have grown exponentially as an organization. Nationally, we have 75 independent, locally governed and operated affiliates that collectively drive, I think it's about $5 billion worth of disability services, people with disabilities of all ages, every year. We serve as a national network. We work with about 50,000 kids on the autism spectrum every day through the Easterseals network. We've grown our impact primarily by getting really good at partnering with government agencies and securing government contracts for our services. And so we've been growing, expanding, really without the need to, do big, campaigns. Or for a long time, Easterseals did telethons. After the Easterseals campaign outlived its usefulness, everyone started to do telethons. And I think right now, there's only one affiliate left still doing a telethon. It's Easterseals Rio Grande Valley, down in McAllen, Harlingen. And it's an amazing telethon, by the way. Very successful for them. But telethons really are kind of a fundraising tool of the past also. So we don't do telethons anymore. But at that same time, we kept growing, expanding, really building our brand as a trusted partner to government entities that were looking to provide disability services to our population.
Yeah. If you can, at the beginning, when this was started in Cleveland and it had a different name, what was the genesis for the desire to have an organization like this? What were the initial services that were intended to be provided to the American public?
That's a great question. So there was a doctor in Cleveland whose son, it was back in the 20s, or actually the teens, if it's over 100 years old. I'm a little math challenged. But his son was hit by an automobile and was disabled as a result of that accident. And at that time, so Easterseals, one of our core services from day one has been rehabilitative therapy programs, physical, occupational, speech therapy primarily. And so back in 1918 or 1919, physical therapy was like New Age, right? It was like almost like going to the local shaman almost, it was, little was known about it. It was not typical for a healthcare system to be involved in rehabilitative therapy. And so this physician in Cleveland needed answers for his son. And so he started a physical therapy program to rehab his son. And that's what started. He started the first chapter in Cleveland, saw the impact that it had on his son, how it helped him regain mobility, regain independence, and saw the impact that it had and became passionate about it and started growing chapters of the Society for Crippled Children back in the teens and 20s.
And over time, throughout roughly 100 years until today, who were the individuals that primarily were being serviced by what was then this Organization for Crippled Children, what's now the Easterseals? What's the range of the kids or the people in society that might solicit those services?
Yeah, we I have some staff who cringe when I say this, but I refer to it as kind of as the Walmart of disability services, right? So, we exist in great partnership with a lot of other disability organizations that do amazing work that deal with specific disabilities like United Cerebral Palsy. The Multiple Sclerosis Society, MS Society, is another one that deals with a specific condition. Easterseals, we are in the broader disability space. So we serve people of any age, any background, and essentially any type of disability, whether it be physical, whether it be intellectual, behavioral, addictive, any type of barrier that an individual is experiencing that is holding them back from being able to live an independent, community-based life. Easterseals will find a way to help them overcome those barriers.
Yeah. That sounds like a lot to bite off.
Yeah. It is every day.
Certainly a worthy aim and a worthy mission. Is there, of those four, is there one that is taking up the plurality of the time, maybe at this facility specifically in Austin?
Yeah, we work with a lot of physical and intellectual in the physical and intellectual disability space. So in Central Texas, we operate about 12 different programs. Our two largest are our early childhood intervention program, which provides home-based therapy, physical, occupational, speech, some nutrition counseling, service coordination, and case management for families, home-based, for kids age 0 to 3 that are experiencing some type of disability or developmental delay. So we're the first line of defense for those kids when they come home from the NICU to help working with them and their parents. We don't just work with the kids. It's a parent activity because ultimately we want the parents to be the therapist, the best therapist for their child, to make sure that that child is school ready by the age of 6. And so we serve about 500 families a month through that home-based therapy program. Our second largest program is a paid job training program. We do lawn and landscaping across Central Texas, and we hire people with disabilities and barriers. We employ them as a way for them to kind of get back on track and take the next step. And so throughout the year, we'll employ probably 250 to 200 individuals, adults in that program. And we mow grass, weed eat in parks, along highways. We work with the city of Austin, Travis County, some federal buildings downtown. We also have a janitorial services program. So we'll hire folks to do janitorial work. And then when we employ them, we have licensed professional counselors on staff that can work with those clients. We provide free counseling services, other wraparound services that they need to hopefully move up and get promoted into other higher paying jobs.
Yeah. The primary service of the kids who are between, I think you said 0 to 3, are those therapists, are they employed by Easterseals, or do you work with them through some other mechanism?
They're our staff. So we have in total in Central Texas, we employ about 125 staff. And when you add our paid job training clients, who technically are employees also, but they're client employees, in total, it's about 200 people that Easterseals employs here in Central Texas.
There's a wide range of, I'm sure, extremely difficult work that those therapists are performing. I guess my first question would be, the primary goal, if I heard you correctly, is autonomy and independence. Is that long term? That's the objective for working with individuals with these disabilities?
Yes.
What, in your judgment, tends to be the most challenging, disability or circumstances that are maybe more so than others, a struggle to get people to that point?
That's a great question, first of all. And right off the bat, I would say there isn't any one thing, right? And, we're talking about 25% of the population experiences some type of disability throughout their lifetime, right? So we're the only minority group in America that any person can become a part of at any point in time in their life. And so when you talk about disability, there are individuals with disabilities that inside the employment system in this country, inside society, they're able to function very well in those systems that we've created to define normal, right? there are other individuals that are very gifted. When you look at people on the autism spectrum,
Yep.
Some of the most intelligent people I have ever met would be considered people with disabilities on the autism spectrum who are brilliant, are so brilliant that they process the world around them differently than us, quote unquote, normal people do, right? And because they don't process their environment the same way we do, we essentially, normal society, we've created barriers for these incredibly brilliant people just because they don't feel normal to us, right? And so I would say one of the biggest barriers we face, honestly, is, quote unquote, I'm air quoting with my fingers right now, normal society, getting to the place where we can accept their difference and be able to get beyond that to still employ them, to allow them to live in my apartment complex, right? To befriend them, right? That when I see them in the grocery store, I don't think they're weird or abnormal. So I think the biggest challenge, the biggest barrier a lot of our folks face is just helping broader society accept them.
Yeah. The scope here of who we're talking about that this team and this organization works with, you mentioned that the name used to be the Organization for Crippled Children, I think something like that. Mm-hmm. I think almost everyone would notice if someone had a physical disability, would lump that into that's understood to be an impediment to autonomy. What are the other names? You mentioned autism as one. What are the other ailments or disabilities that may not be as widely well known that your team and the organization generally works with?
Well, there's several, and in some cases, we work with clients that experience multiple of these disabilities simultaneously. But there's cerebral palsy. There is multiple sclerosis. There's brain injury, traumatic brain injury. We work with several clients that have experienced traumatic brain injury at some point in time in their life. There are individuals who are physically challenged. There's actually a really awesome, they're amazing people, wheelchair community in Central Texas that we're blessed to be able to know and work with in some ways. But little known fact, Austin actually is one of the epicenters of wheelchair rugby in the nation. The coach of the U.S. Olympic wheelchair rugby team lives here in Austin. And they actually have to go all the way to Birmingham, Alabama as a team to train because we don't have the facilities to be able to do that for them here in Central Texas. But there's an amazing wheelchair sports community here. And if you ever see these guys play wheelchair rugby, I wouldn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole because they go at it. It is a serious sport. But so those types of physical challenges that, really don't have any individual name, but is kind of a broad category. And then when you get into behavioral disabilities and challenges, behavioral health is becoming more and more, I think our understanding of the impact of behavioral health is becoming more and more prevalent as we understand better how to deal with people who are experiencing some type of behavioral challenge, right? And again, it's just as much about addressing and helping the client through the behavioral health challenge as it is about how we as a society look at them through our societal lens and how we understand not only what they're going through, but what caused it and what it's going to take for us as a society to be able to help those friends and neighbors through that challenge.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think I wanted to ask you how you feel like we're doing collectively as a society on that, and what the biggest points of, in your judgment, how are we still ignorant about these concepts?
Yeah. Well, it's a journey, right? So it's one of those issues where there probably may not be a finish line. But if you take a step back and look at it in historical context, you realize it wasn't but maybe 2 generations ago that we as a society, the way we dealt with people with disabilities is we had an entire national state hospital system, right? Where you had a child with some type of disability, and more often than not, you would drive them to the state hospital and put them in the state hospital, and that's where they would stay for their entire life. The Kennedys, right?
Yes,
they had
just
a daughter.
About that.
And their daughter. I lived for a couple of years in Wisconsin, a couple of miles away from the institution that their daughter stayed after she experienced her brain injury. And that's how we dealt with disability as a society. So when you think about over the last 30 years, how we as a society have started to realize the potential for independence that these folks possess, the unbelievable drive and desire to live independently that they have. And in many cases, all that's required as a society are a few supports, right? A few hands up along the way. And these folks can do amazing things in society. They can live independently. Mm. And so that's started, it's been a incredibly hot topic in Texas for a while, because we have a state hospital system, a state-supported living center system network in Texas. The numbers of folks living in those centers has dropped dramatically. And it's led to a real, I think, healthy discussion, passionate and healthy discussion about, do we still need to operate these? Mm. And of course, again, going back to disability is a spectrum, right? It is a broad spectrum. And there are families that have family members with very severe disabilities that do require that kind of full-time, round-the-clock care.
Yeah.
And I think we as a society have a moral obligation to provide that to those families. But what we have learned as a society is that the number of people that probably require that intensive service is much less than what we as a society assumed was needed 30 years ago.
And undoubtedly, that has to be viewed as a success. That we, so many people are now able to live in that way that wouldn't have been able to, 3 decades ago. What caused us to be able, I say us as just generally the American population, how did we remove that ignorance from our collective conscience? Like, how did we improve in that way? What did we learn that allowed us to make that shift?
Well, we have improved. I think not removed it.
Sure.
But it's not been easy, and it's been a hard-fought battle. But I think, honestly, when I see the power, I've spent the last 8.5 years in disability services. Mm-hmm. It's been the most rewarding work of my nonprofit career, by far, because I feel like I have gotten so much more out of it than what I've put in. Mm-hmm. By being in the same universe as these people, for no fault of their own, that have these huge physical and intellectual barriers to overcome. And when you see what they do every day to get to work on time, earn a living wage, maintain an apartment, it goes so far beyond what I have to do to get my rear end out of bed and off to work in the morning.
Yeah.
Every day, they're running essentially an Ironman triathlon to get to work on time, right? And they're not, they're not making millions of dollars, but I have seen some of the most unbelievably happiest people I have ever met in my life. One is a ticket taker at the Great Hills Theater. Been there for years, been voted Employee of the Year 7 or 8 times. And she is amazing. She's a ticket taker. And if you met her, you would think that she was the richest person in Austin, Texas. And happy, people love her. She has a bigger network of friends than I could ever hope to have. Like, unbelievably fulfilled life. And what she has overcome to get to there inspires me every day. I can only aspire to experience a small corner of the happiness that she has experienced as a ticket taker at Great Hills Theater.
Yeah.
And when it's impossible not to go through your professional life and live day to day and being around people like that without learning about myself as a person, right? Like, what is my happiness about? Like, what am I about? And if they can accomplish that and achieve that much happiness in the process, like, what's getting me down, right?
It sounds like, I mean, this individual you were just mentioning, it's possible 30 years ago or 40 years ago, she would not be doing that, right? I mean, with just as an anecdote, that is an individual that potentially a generation ago would be living in some sort of institution. She'd
be in a state hospital or in her parents' basement, essentially, until they passed away. And then she had to go into the state hospital. And now she has that opportunity. And so now our challenge is still a challenge, but it's less a challenge about how do we change public perception about the possibilities and potential of these. And I want to come back and remind us, we're talking about 25% of the population. Like, this isn't a fringe, 0.001% rare, DNA condition that a couple of people experience in this country. We're talking about 25% of the population that we essentially wrote off until a couple of generations ago. And so now our biggest challenge is raising the awareness, raising the understanding, raising the acceptance of those of us, again, quote unquote, normal people, about the fact that these people can be successful.
Yeah, can and want to.
Oh, right? My gosh.
And that was something I wanted to ask as you were telling the story about the ticket taker, is like, I don't know if this is an overgeneralization or if you would agree with this assessment, but that even for people who have intellectual disabilities, it sounds like in her case, potentially, that there is an innate desire for contribution and work and being a part of the community. I don't know if it's literally that simple or what you might want to add to that, but that strikes me as being part of at least her story.
Yeah, it's a great point. I learned the first month I came to Easterseals that we don't talk about what Easterseals has done for these poor people, because you get your hand slapped because they are so passionate about earning and keeping every shred of independence that they fight for every day, that the inference that Easterseals saved them, right? I learned that the hard way, but I learned it really quickly. We partner with them. And so we work with them to help do that. We provide services that allow them to do that. But what they've achieved isn't the result of a handout. They make that very clear.
Yeah.
And very accurately clear.
Yeah. I think the 25% number you mentioned would shock people who hear that. Mm-hmm. One, why is that shocking? And where is there something in that 25% that is giving half of that number? 12.5% of this population is deemed disabled that most people aren't aware of. Where does that total number stem from? Well,
it stems from the full spectrum I mentioned before. we are getting better at identifying disability and addressing it, right? So one example, this I wouldn't suggest would be an overall driver, because it's always been in the 20 to 25% range. But it is, as you've said, it's been a lack of understanding that the number is what it is, right? So a big chunk of it is an awareness challenge. It isn't being driven up where 10 years ago it was only 10%. But now we're calling people that have a bad day somebody with a disability. Like that's not what we're talking about. But we are doing a better job, like autism, of understanding the full extent of the autism spectrum. And we're doing a better job of being able to create therapy services, other programs to help individuals on the autism spectrum understand better how they can still be successful and live a life on the autism spectrum, right? So if you look at autism rates, what was it? I'm going to get the exact number wrong. So please don't quote me on this. But, in 1970, something like 1 in 2,000 people were believed to be on the autism spectrum. 1 in a couple of thousand people on the autism spectrum. Right now, the figure's down to it's less than 100. Is it 1 in 56?
That sounds right.
Of us are on the autism spectrum, right? And so we are understanding better what it is and how to treat it. And so as that understanding of what disability is happens, we're also starting to understand too that if you're a person with a disability, we have this, and God love them because it did amazing work, raised millions of dollars for a long time. But the Jerry Lewis telethon, right? That if you're a person with a disability, it doesn't mean you're one of Jerry's kids, right? Yeah. But so often we think a person with a disability is in a wheelchair or has some kind of visual, physical issue that's obvious. And I think we're just starting to raise this society's awareness that disability comes in all different shapes, forms, sizes, conditions.
I was going to ask you this earlier, and maybe I should have. The firm definition that the organization uses for that term disabled. What does that mean to you and to the organization?
So we don't necessarily use the term disabled, right? It's called people first language. So it's people with disabilities, right? So it's people first.
Okay. You're
a person first who happens to have some type of disability, right? And so for me, what I've learned as someone who didn't have experience working with people with disabilities prior to coming to Easterseals, it's opened my eyes up, right? That what I have seen is that so often what we call a person with a disability has been such an enabler for happiness and success for these people. Like, if you work with people with disabilities on a daily basis, these aren't people that sit and cry in the corner. That we have to talk off a ledge every day. These are motivated, goal-driven, happy, fulfilled people that because they have had the opportunity to experience the success of overcoming a disability, it gives them this unbelievable confidence, right? I mean, if you meet somebody with cerebral palsy, right? One of my best friends is a person with cerebral palsy, works for the Texas Workforce Commission, former board chair of Easterseals, just an unbelievable friend, an unbelievable man, and who has overcome. I tell him all the time, like he overcomes more obstacles before lunchtime than I've had to overcome in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And when overcoming obstacles
Yeah.
becomes such an identifier, such a part of who you are, it builds this confidence that anybody that wants to, quote unquote, again, I'm air quoting,
Yeah.
able-bodied people that want to look down their nose at these folks, they totally don't get it.
Yeah.
Because everything that they've been conditioned, all the success that they've experienced just in getting to where they are, has made them incredibly positive, confident people.
Do you think those two things are correlated? That it is partly the overcoming of the obstacle that is resulting in the happiness?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, I look at it as an employer, you know. You hire people that know how to overcome challenges. Any employee that you have that knows how to overcome challenges, I bet bottom dollar is going to be one of your best employees,
Yeah.
right? But people that grow up in privilege, right, that have everything given to them, have never had to overcome a challenge, and then get out into the real world and have to figure out how to overcome challenges. I almost feel more sorry for them than the kids we work with age 0 to 3 that had overcoming challenge ingrained in their very DNA from the day they were born. What a great privilege they've had.
It's such a great irony about life and about people generally. Mm-hmm. I'll just tell you a quick story. When I was in college, I went to Duke, so I went to a private school, and I had never met kids from private schools. I went to a public high school, and going there and meeting a lot of 18-year-olds that had grown up in boarding schools, a lot of them from the Northeast. I had never met such troubled people in my life. And it took me a while to come up with some pet theory as to what was really causing that. And what I had determined was they had been, quote unquote, given everything their entire life. They had come from extremely rich families, but they had essentially no community, no relationship with their parents. I'm overstating it a little bit, but that was generally the themes in these kids that would show up to freshman year who were already bordering on being alcoholics and just dysfunctional generally,
and unhappy. And that's why I keep coming back to the idea that we as a society, it's really ironic for me to say we work with people with disabilities, because to your point, and it's such a great point, Dan, that to use the term disability after 8.5 years in the space, I so don't look at that as a negative. Right? And I have to be careful about saying that too, to be sure, because there are, again, 25% of the population, there are disabilities that are incredibly difficult and do result in families experiencing a lot of stress, a lot of pain. We work with those families every day. But to see their happiness driven by small little wins that they see, right? Even the severely intellectually disabled son or daughter that they see respond to something in a way that they never responded to. The happiness that builds, the success, the joy that creates in just that little burst of light for them goes so far beyond how most of the rest of society defines what success and accomplishment really is. And to me, that's special because success is all around us. Accomplishment is all around us. If we're just willing to change our mindset and realize what truly leads to happiness versus what truly leads to us chasing after the next thing that ultimately isn't going to bring happiness anyway.
I want to talk a little bit about how you ended up in your position. You know, you mentioned earlier in the interview that you've been doing this now for, I think you said 8.5 years. What got you into this in the first place?
Well, so I've been a nonprofit person. I guess I should do people first language, people with disabilities. I'm a person with a nonprofit background for 28 years now. So 28 years. And so far, I've not made profits all 28 years. So success. Speaking of defining success differently. So no, I'm a career nonprofit person. Started with the American Red Cross at their national office in Washington, D.C. The first 9 or so years was in blood banking and blood research in Wisconsin for a couple of years. Moved to Austin for a job with the American Heart Association. Had a terrific experience, 8 or so years with the Heart Association. And so I had been in the nonprofit space for a while. And through a series of fortuitous consequences, got connected to the Easterseals opportunity and started a conversation with them about 9 years ago or so that ultimately led to me becoming the CEO of Easterseals.
Yeah.
Why specifically I ended up at Easterseals, I'm not sure. I mean, you might need to ask the board members that were involved at that time, and hopefully they would have a good answer. But it's been an incredible experience.
Yeah. Did you personally have any experience working with disabled people prior to taking the position, or was there something about the work that just spoke to you?
I did not.
Yeah.
But I knew my career goal was ultimately I wanted to be the CEO of a nonprofit, starting with the Red Cross at their national office. I set a goal early on that I wanted to get into the CEO level with a nonprofit that wasn't what might be considered a startup or a mom and pop level, but I wanted to enter in at with a somewhat larger nonprofit.
Yep.
And so when the Easterseals opportunity became available, and I started to learn the size of the organization, the impact that they had, that's what really drove the interest. But I had not worked in any kind of focused way with people with disabilities prior to that, apart from, some with the in my blood banking experience, people with certain blood disorders that we worked with. Heart Association, obviously, we worked with a lot of folks experiencing cardiovascular disease and stroke. And so I had some experience in that space, but nothing to the level that Easterseals presented.
And I want to talk through the general process between like an individual in the community or a family in the community knows about the work and the services that Easterseals provides, and then what triggers the initial outreach that then leads to the services that you guys provide actually being implemented with that individual. Just generally talk me through how that process works, how the initial reach out takes place, and then what you guys do to begin to help and provide the services that you do.
Well, there's a lot of channels, referral channels that come in from all over the community. In our early intervention program for kids age 0 to 3, a lot of referrals from family doctors, local health systems, school districts in some cases. And all the way up some of our adult services. We have a housing services program. We provide home modification services for adults with disabilities and veterans with disabilities. And so we work with the Texas Veterans Commission on some of those programs. The City of Austin has a home repair program. And so we partner closely with the City of Austin. And a lot of times we work with the family of nonprofits in Central Texas that we love and we collaborate with every day to find ways to serve people differently. More often than not, if you looked at the client lists of most nonprofits in Austin, a lot of us are serving the same folks anyway. So why not bring it all together and find ways to wrap around services that people need to lift them out of poverty or out of whatever circumstance they face, by being proactive to work that collaborative spirit into the fabric of who we are as a nonprofit network in Central Texas.
Yeah. And that the work is incredible. It's incredible to me, frankly, that the name Easterseals is not more widely recognized or understood by the general population, given the breadth of the work that the organization does. I'm sure at a national level, there has probably been some discussion about a potential rename, because that certainly threw me off when I began to look into the organization and learn what it did. It was just hard to make the link between disabled, helping people who are disabled and Easterseals. It didn't quite register initially. I had to kind of look at it a few times before it finally did. I want to talk about the success rate. Like, it's incredible what you guys do, and it's incredible that it does seem like more autonomy is being granted to the people in the community who come and seek the services that you provide. How often would you say that the organization is successful in achieving its goal of providing autonomy and independence and really integrity to people with disabilities? And when you're not, how often does that happen, and what's the real challenge or what seems currently to be an impossible obstacle to making that happen?
Well, so, we're talking about a lifelong journey, right? And so even when specific interventions, like we have an employment, supported employment program where we help people with disabilities find jobs, like all of us, you get one job, and more than likely you're not going to keep that job the rest of your life, right? So when I say independence, that's why it's not a finish line. You've achieved independence, we can put the Easterseals seal of approval on you and move on to the next person, right? Because it's a community. And, the overused phrase of forever is it takes a village, and it's because it's true. That's why it's overused. But for sure in disability services, because people that we work with that help find jobs, a lot of times we find they need to be retrained, redeployed. They need to find another job because in some cases, they rely heavily on public transportation. And we've had lots of cases where Cat Metro will change a bus route, and our client can't get to the bus anymore because they move the route one street over, and they're not mobile enough to be able to travel that distance to get on the bus that took them to work for years, right? Yeah. And so all of a sudden the employer says, your client abandoned the job, they just stopped showing up. Well, so we have to find other ways to get them a job. So it's an ongoing, lifelong mission that we carry. I wish we got to the point where once you got, we could say you receive 10 services from Easterseals, you will achieve independence for life. Yeah. God help us all if we could get there. I don't see that day coming anytime soon, right? Because, again, we're talking about a group that anybody can become a part of at any point in time in their life, right? We work with a lot of adults that experienced their disability for the first time initially at the age of 40, the age of 50. One of our board members was one of the star soccer players for Texas Christian University, and a tragic car accident caused a lifelong disability. And as a result, she has turned it into this amazing give back gift. She's a board member of ours now. She's started nonprofits that serve people with disabilities. She's a passionate fundraiser for others that need services. And so she became a part of our family in her early 20s. So it really is. And honestly, that's what I find rewarding about Easterseals too, because if you've met one person with a disability, you've met one person with a disability. Yep. They all have unique needs. and those needs and the array of services that they require and that they need at any given point in time changes as they go through life.
Yeah. People in the community are going to listen to this, and I would be curious to get your thoughts on how they can help. If people are listening to this and they're intrigued, they're interested, something has touched their heart related to this conversation, what's the biggest need that in Central Texas specifically, you guys have that people, ordinary people, quote unquote, might be able to help you guys with?
Well, 9.9 out of 10 nonprofits would say fundraising, write us a check, right? And I've got at least 1 or 2 feet into that 9.9 out of 10 probably. But honestly, when I look at our mission, and when I talk about how society as a whole, how we need to continue to find ways to allow these incredible people access to our quote unquote, air quotes, normal society, it really is contingent on each and every one of us to find a way, from our kids in elementary school that see the special ed kids that they come into contact with, helping them understand that the differences aren't that different, right? They're just processing the world through a very different lens than you do. And that's it, right? So as parents, helping to drive that awareness and understanding from an early age, as adults, as supervisors, looking to hire employees, understanding that just because someone has some type of physical or intellectual disability doesn't automatically mean that they can't work for you, right? And because what research studies are showing more and more is that particularly for people with disabilities, where holding somewhat of an entry-level type position, for most businesses, those are very high turnover, right? They're just stepping stone jobs for the college kid that needs a job in the summer, and then they're going to go back to school or whatever, right? What businesses are finding that embrace hiring people with disabilities, Walgreens is a benchmark example. CVS is another benchmark, is that hiring people with disabilities is actually good for business because they're hiring people that aren't going to turn over. It's not a stepping stone job. These are people that allowing them to stock their shelves is their path to living an independent life. And they will fight tooth and nail to for you to allow them to continue to stock their shelves for as long as they possibly can. There is value as an employer in that, right? So as an employer, understanding why it's not just a nice, and by the way, I would not want anyone listening to hire a person with a disability out of charity. I don't want charity. It's good business. It makes sense to hire people with disabilities into the right positions. And so I would challenge employers to take a hard look at a workforce that will be the most committed, most engaged, most passionate employees you could possibly employ. If as an employer, you can get beyond your own ideas of what that disability is, and most importantly, what it isn't. Right.
A lot of good social education is exactly that, right? I mean, we were talking earlier about the 30, 40 years ago, what the world that people who are, intellectually disabled were living in versus today. And that is a perfect example, I think, of a narrative that I think is prevalent in the culture, which is these people are really not hireable. And as you just said, it isn't out of charity. It's out of a long-term economic pure self-interest, potentially, for these people really having a passion for that kind of work.
I think one of the best examples we're seeing of this right now is as our understanding of autism and what the autism spectrum is becoming more apparent. By most best guesstimates right now, probably at least about 30% of employees in the high-tech sector are probably on the autism spectrum.
Yeah.
So, without being able to diagnose it formally, right? Like, I'm a person with autism, without even having that understanding or knowledge, 30% of probably the highest growth economic sector in this nation's history, for sure since the Industrial Revolution, was driven by people with disabilities.
Yeah. It's so true. And as we wind this conversation down, I want to go over a couple other things. One is just to clarify again the segments of people with disabilities with whom the organization work with. I think you mentioned it's physical, it's cognitive, it's addiction as well. I think you mentioned. Are there others as well, or is it just those three?
It's pretty much those three: physical, intellectual, behavioral,
right?
and addictive disabilities.
Okay. Maybe if we could spend just a couple minutes on the addictive and the behavioral side. We've talked a lot about the other two. Talk to me about that. Addiction is something I think a lot of people know is a plight within the country. How do you help people who are going through that kind of suffering?
Well, we're patient, and it's hard work. And it's heart-wrenching. I mean, in so many ways, it presents a bigger challenge than even someone born with a physical or intellectual disability, right? The hold that you see that it has on folks. So it manifests itself programmatically at Easterseals primarily through our paid job training program. So a lot of the clients that we hire to do that lawn and landscaping work are coming out of the criminal justice system. And as you know, in Texas, if you have a record, Texas is one of the most difficult states in America to actually think about supporting yourself and living an independent life if you have a criminal justice record. And so they come out and we provide employment opportunities for them as a stepping stone. We hire a lot of folks from halfway houses into this program. And a good percentage of the clients that come out of those situations, we work with, we provide services, we work with other organizations, we refer them to, and yet still, they fall back into criminal justice, they come out, and we have to have a different mindset than a traditional employer, right? Where, you did this and it was against the employee handbook, and so we'll never hire you again. Well, not that kind of program. We hire a lot of folks that mess up. They fall back into whatever they were into. They come back out, and we give a second, third, fourth, we're a fifth chance employer. And we never give up on those folks.
Yeah.
And I wish we knew. I wish we had scientific evidence that said this array of services will lead to independent living for people with these addictions. We haven't come up with that yet. Yeah. So we keep working with all of our partners in the community to find that way in and help that person through that addiction.
Yeah. In closing, and with my final question, before I ask you, I just want to first just say, on behalf of the community, thank you for the work that you and the organization does. It's I love highlighting organizations like yours because I have such gratitude for the fact that these places exist and the amount of good that you put back into the community and the amount of help that you provide. And like you said, I think we all like to think that we are self-made and that we could never need services that places like Easterseals provide. That's obviously not true. And it's because of organizations like this that I think there's a support system for people who in a potentially a really traumatic time in their life have options and have services. How I want to close is just by asking you, I know you've probably done plenty of these interviews over your career, just to speak on anything else that you think is worth the public's attention or additional myths that you think is worth correcting or disabusing people of certain notions. You've done already some of this in the conversation, but just to open it up for you to have as much time as you'd like to talk about anything else that you haven't gotten a chance to address.
Wow. Well, world peace. No, no, we won't start there. I'm glad you asked that, because I think one of the things as I think about barriers that I don't think we've really mentioned a lot is poverty, right? And if you look at national statistics for people with disabilities, our folks have 50% higher poverty rate than the national average, right? So while we are a disability services nonprofit, we are also very much, we have a big foot in the poverty abatement mission also. 60, 70%, about 70% of people with disabilities are unemployed. Imagine if we had a national unemployment rate of 70%. You think, you look at the outrage we've experienced the last year through this pandemic, when the unemployment rate ticked up whatever it ticked up to, right? I'm talking 50 years. People with disabilities have had a 70% unemployment rate. And yet we haven't really gotten to the point where we want to address a particular group of people that represent 25% of the population with a 70% unemployment rate. And that leads to poverty issues. And when you think about poverty, I think you mentioned myths. One of the myths that I've seen, because I've worked with people in poverty, I've worked with volunteers and board members who are very wealthy, successful. This myth that is still very much ingrained, that poverty is a direct result of effort, right? It's lazy people that are in poverty, right? And if we could start to get beyond just that one thought, right? Because to oversimplify it, it makes us just feel better. Again, us quote unquote normal people, what we do to feel good about just living our own occluded existence on this planet. And so one of the things we do to not feel so bad about people that live in poverty is to say, oh, well, I worked harder than them. Let me tell you, I've known a lot of people, a lot of really wealthy people, and the amount of annual income they earn, or any of us earns, is absolutely directly unrelated to the amount of effort they put into that job every year, right? Mm-hmm. So, and for us, when we think about people with disabilities, getting over a disability is obviously an unbelievable challenge. Imagine being a family with a child with a disability that also, for no fault of their own, and by the way, even if it is by fault of their own, why does that matter? Also have to overcome poverty on top of a child with a disability. Imagine what we as a society could do for families that are without hope. When you're facing poverty as a challenge and disability as a challenge, and you start to understand and you invest enough time into these folks to understand this has nothing to do with hard work. And at the end of the day, these are people that work 3 times harder than I have ever worked a day in my life. And most people, quote unquote, normal people have ever worked. They're working multiple jobs. The stress related to how they're going to access a health system that they don't have access to get the services that they know their child is going to need to live independently, because the parents aren't going to be around forever. So what's going to happen to my child after I die, right? Yeah. Can you even imagine? Like dropping your kid off at college, you feel like you're walking off a cliff. I just had to do that twice in the last couple of years, right? Imagine the thought that if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, like my child depends 100% on me, and I live in poverty on top of that. there's a sector of this community that if we could just get beyond our own political and whatever other beliefs about what motivated, quote unquote, them to end up in poverty, like they chose that, if we could just, as Stephen Covey said in, the 7 Habits, the most important one is seek first to understand, then to be understood. If we as a society could put that much more effort into understanding those families, what it's like to live a life with no hope, and what that ultimately as a barrier is to overcome in addition to poverty and disability. If we as a society could be generous enough to give those folks not a handout, but a hand up, I think it would be transformational for us, who we are as a people, as a society, and also economically. Yeah. When you think about what we're going to need to continue to grow our economy, people living in poverty with no hope, even if you want to look at it through a straight economic lens, we're going to have to help them carve out a bigger economic niche to fuel the economic rebound that we all hope are having the next couple of years. Mm. So if we look at this as a moment in time, as we've all experienced economic downturn and hardship the last year, right? Not to just look at that as a blip of caused by a pandemic, but to seek to understand what that felt like. When I didn't know if am I still going to have a job when this pandemic is over? What did that feel like? What fear did it engender? The depression that it's caused us as a nation. When you think about families that deal with that, like I'm not going to minimize the pandemic, but the impact that poverty, disability, all these things has on those families. You live your entire life in the middle of a raging pandemic. Yep. And so if we could understand that as a society and use that to motivate us to be more generous in what we're willing to support in terms of government programs that aren't going to be perfect, by the way, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's never going to be perfect. But at least if we as a society could become emotionally generous enough to understand the plight of families that have lost hope in this community and reach out to them in meaningful ways, it would transform Austin.
Yep. Well, Tod, thank you for the conversation, mostly the time. I know you're a busy guy, and I think I speak on behalf of a lot of people in just wishing you guys the best of luck here, moving forward with the organization, with everything else. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it.